Hey, well, good morning, everybody. You should be able to see my screen out there. The first screen says intersection safety on that. And again, welcome to our workshop for intersection safety. We are glad that everybody has taken the time to join us in these virtual times as we're all hunkered in the bunker. So we'll go ahead and get going here. Just introduce myself very briefly. I think most of you already know me. My name is Brent Jennings. I spent 31 years at the Idaho Transportation Department. And I can't believe it. It's almost been 5 years now that I've retired and decided to embark upon a new life of that retirement. But it also took me to giving back to the community, and I do work in nonprofit world. And then if anybody wants to put me to work, I certainly will do that. And a little bit of careful what you work for. I do some of these workshops for LHTAC and also for others. So I've been very fortunate to be able to just stay busy and still mix in that retirement. So you'll see our virtual housekeeping slide there. We've gone through most of that. The last bullet there says at some point in time, you're probably going to need some sheets of paper and a pen. You don't need to do that right now or jump up and get that right now, but at some point we'll do that. So throughout our time together, because we're in the virtual world, we're going to ask you some polling questions periodically, and Dawn is going to help us with that, and she'll bring up that first polling question. And we're going to ask you, you are joining us from what region of the state? The North region, which is the Coeur d'Alene, maybe Lewiston region, Southwest region, certainly in Boise. South Central would be that Twin Falls region, and Southeast Idaho would be Pocatello, Idaho Falls, arching on up towards Salmon. So just take a moment. Let's get used to using this. Click it, click your answers, and Dawn will monitor that. And let's give it just a second or two, and then she'll report some results.
Yeah, it looks like you guys are figuring that out pretty fast. We've got 27 out of our 34 responding. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes and we'll close that out and share the results. So we're just asking you to use that poll question. You should be able to just click right on there. Whoever's got the computer screen or the phone, tablet screen up, to go ahead and click that. Looks like we're waiting for just 3 more and then we'll close it out.
Hey, Dawn, when there are 3 or 4 at one location, is that still just one work just for one, right?
Yep.
All right.
Awesome. So it looks like we're going to close this out in just a minute. I've got just about everybody who's answered. All right, so I'm going to close this poll and I'm going to share our results.
That's great. That's very interesting. You can see we're kind of scattered all over, and kind of as a bit expected. Southwest would be a few more people than we would expect, and South Central looks like we're a little shy there, but you can see we represented ourselves very well throughout the state there. So go ahead and close that, and we'll get started. So as we look at intersection safety, we can think about it starting at the bigger, larger level as a national problem and work our way down as to what this looks like in Idaho. And to start with, we recognize that there's 3 million miles of local roads that are maintained and operated by local administrators, local highway agencies, state highway agencies, township managers, and so forth. And it represents approximately 38,000 counties, cities, villages, and even including the tribal governments across the United States. And one common issue that always comes up is for all agencies, especially local agencies, is highway traffic safety and the safety at our intersections. We all recognize really that intersections vary in their shape, size, the number of legs coming into it, and the number of turn lanes. You know, and we also recognize that the 4-legged intersection is the most common, and we know that really one size doesn't fit all. So as we go through today, we're going to find out that one size doesn't fit all. We have various shapes and sizes, pavement types. We clearly come back to, we're very interested in knowing what the safety of the intersection look like, the causation of crashes, and some of the countermeasures that we can employ to help safety. So there's a lot of people, if you ask line up 10 different people and ask them 10 different questions as far as, what is the definition of an intersection? One of the most pressing traffic safety intersections on local roads is that safety. And we all agree that intersections do vary widely in their sizes and shapes, but typically there are 4 legs that make up the typical intersection. So according to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, and they've got a lot of standards that they use nationwide to keep us standardized, an intersection is defined as a general area with 2 or more highways join across, including the roadway and roadside facilities, which I thought was very interesting. They include those adjoining roadside facilities, the traffic movements within the area. Each highway radiating from an intersection and forming part of its intersection leg makes up the intersection, and the most common intersection, of course, has 4 legs. Intersections generally involve through across traffic movements and typically involve turning movements between highways or 2 intersection highways. And highways can be thought of, generally speaking, as there is a major highway and a minor highway. And so a major and minor highway are coming together to move traffic. And there are 3 general types of highway crossings. There's at-grade intersections, where the roadways come together at the same elevation. Grade separations without ramps, and we think about our interstate system when we think about grade separations. I'm going to go up and over or down under and across the interstate. And the 3rd type of intersection is that interchange with ramps. So today, though, we're just going to talk only about those at-grade crossings and those safety issues that are associated with those at-grade crossings. So we do have a wide range of surface types. Local rural roads also encompass a wide range of these types. And so if we were sitting in the class today, and I don't have it as a polling question, but one of the questions that I would typically ask is, are we still dealing with a lot of gravel or a lot of dirt roads? And as I've given this workshop before, a lot of the feedback that I get is we're primarily dealing with paved intersections, with a paved surface. However, we recognize that we still have areas that within our regions that do have gravel roads, and there are a few dirt roads as well. So further, we can think about the intersections. They have typically kind of evolved over time. And so when we think about history, we go way back. We started out, on foot. Then we started with horse and buggy. And then we evolved slowly into cars, and then the roadways got bigger and bigger, and the cars got bigger and faster. However, the geometrics in many cases didn't change a whole lot. And so as we look back for the last 100 years or so of transportation, how transportation and the modes of transportation have evolved, in many cases we're kind of stuck with some of those lousy geometrics, and the roadway itself just evolved. And so we do have roadways that when they join and come together at those intersection points with those typically 4 legs, they're disjointed. It's not always perfect. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on today about how we have to now deal with skewed intersections. We've got the modern car and the modern traffic and higher speed traffic, but we're still challenged with some of these lousy geometrics that just really evolved over time. So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration indicates that over 50% of the fatalities on U.S. roadways occur in rural areas. However, this figure is a bit disproportionate because there's only 23% of people who live in rural areas, and rural roadways account for just 40% of all vehicle miles traveled nationally. So this makes safety at rural, non-signalized intersections even more important. So it becomes a bit of a disproportionate type of situation, and why it's very important to recognize that we do have a very big safety challenge in the rural setting and at rural intersections. And it's interesting that every 100 right-angle crashes, 1 to 3 fatal and 5 to 15 serious injuries occur for every 100 right-angle crashes. So we've talked just a little bit about the national problem, and so we start now focusing on what's happening locally. And I always like to be able to go over just a few numbers just to kind of set the tone of how important highway safety is, and really kind of bring forward into our thought process what we can do to improve highway safety. In Idaho, and these numbers come from the 2018 crash report that was published by the Idaho Transportation Department. In Idaho, there were just over 24,000 reportable crashes in 2018, which is the last year of the full data. And of those crashes, there were a little over 1,300 that were classified as serious crashes. And the classification of these crashes, if it's a serious crash, it means you're probably not coming back as the same person. You may be paralyzed, you may lose a limb. Your life has changed dramatically. In Idaho in 2018, there were 215 fatal crashes scattered throughout the state that resulted in 234 fatalities. So clearly that tells me that there was more than one fatality that happened at a crash throughout the year 2018. This number was a bit astounding to me. When you add up property damage crashes, when you add up the cost of injuries, and then as morbid as it sounds, people do put a number to the value of your life. So when you add up the costs of the fatalities, the impact to Idaho is just over $4.2 billion. And that equates to just about $2,300 impact to every Idahoan in the state of Idaho. And so if we were sitting in our classroom today, I have asked the question before, maybe some of you have heard it before too, what is the number that is put upon your life? Life is priceless, but for purposes of calculating damages and damage costs, the actuaries out there actually put a number upon you. And perhaps this would have made a good polling question, but I'll go ahead and answer that. The number that's currently used for purposes of calculation is a little over $9 million. So I don't think I'm worth $9 million. Maybe others might agree or disagree with that, but for purposes of calculating that $4.2 billion impact, $9 million is used for that. So you can see that's quite a number. And so when I look at this impact, you know, I've come up with a label I called crash tax. And I don't know about you, but I'm interested in lowering taxes, and the crash tax equates to that $2,300 figure for every Idahoan. Perhaps in theory, how does that come down? Well, if we can improve highway safety and decrease fatalities, decrease serious injuries, perhaps we see like insurance rates come down, medical costs that we all share in come down, and so on. Will that ever happen? I don't know. That would be something to look for in the future and come about through the legislative process. But certainly, Idaho, we can all agree, always deserves better on highway safety. Just a couple of more numbers to share with you. Of our 2015 fatal crashes that happened in 2018 on a statewide basis, and we're talking fatal crashes, 59 of those fatal crashes happened in an urban environment. 156 of them happened in a rural environment. And 81 fatal crashes happened on the local system. And the two biggest causes of fatal crashes or fatalities are single vehicle run off the road crashes and intersections. And so if you were to ask the question, what is the number one cause of fatalities in Idaho? The answer would be single vehicle run off the road crashes, but intersections come in at a very close second. The number one causation of the cause of the single vehicle run off the road crashes is impaired driving. So there's a lot of work to do there. So it's interesting when we look at the fatal crashes as expected, because in a rural environment, even though our traffic may be a little bit less, the impacts are more severe. So here's a second polling question that I'm going to ask Dawn to bring up, and we'll respond to that just to keep us alive and going.
Brent,
yeah.
we had a question come up, and sorry,
Sure.
I didn't address it earlier, from John Perry. He says, at the grade crossings, does that include railroad crossings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the crash data does include railroad crossings. Thanks, John, for bringing that up. Okay. Anything else in the chat box while we're... Okay, so let's visit our second polling question, and here it comes. Idaho's largest number of fatalities is caused by. Everybody should get this one.
So we've got our second poll up now. If you guys can get on there and click your answer. It's just to check in to see where everybody's at. So we're just waiting on a few more. You could get on there and click your answer on the polling question. We'll close this up in 1 minute. You guys can get on there and get your answers in. So the question is, Idaho's largest number of fatalities are caused by intersection crashes or single vehicle run off the road crashes. All right, I think everybody who's going to answer is answered, so we'll close this one up. And we will share those results.
Okay. Yeah, and those are good results. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, the data takes us to the point that single vehicle run off the road crashes is the primary cause or largest number of fatalities, but intersection crashes certainly comes in very close behind as a close second. And those are our two big ones.
Yep. And Brent, we had a couple comments come in. Jeannie had said drunk drivers, and Art had said, do open range animals, are they included in poll data?
Yes. Oh, the first question is impaired driving is the primary cause of single vehicle run off the road crashes. And then yes, the animals, hitting the animals is included in the crash data. Okay. So as we visit this, I just want to close out with a few more numbers, and then we'll start going into the Idaho situation. So as I shared with you just a little bit earlier, we had get my slides going here again, if I can. There we go. We had 215 fatal crashes, and 59 of those crashes happened in an urban environment, and 156 happened in the rural environment. And so when we look at the total number of crashes of our 20 some odd thousand crashes, the majority of those happen in urban and fewer happen in rural. So when crashes tend to happen in that rural environment, they're more severe and they cause more harm to individuals. Okay. So I'll just kind of close out our data portion by throwing this slide up. You've probably heard that Idaho, where is Idaho going? And Idaho is very, very interested in going towards zero deaths and eliminating all fatalities and serious injuries in Idaho. And so sometimes we often ask the question, you know, can we get to zero? And many times people will say, and when I'm in the classroom and I ask this question, many people will say, no, I don't think we'll ever get there because we're all human beings and driving is such a behavioral type of task. And so I asked the question, well, would 30%, 40 or 50% reduction be acceptable? And many times people will think that that is a good acceptable number. But when I finally then asked the question, what is the acceptable number of fatalities within your family unit? It always comes back as zero. So we kind of think along those lines. And will we get to zero someday? Probably not. Maybe in my lifetime, I hope so. But I believe at some point in time in our society that we will go to zero. In fact, some Idaho counties do go to zero for a month at a time. A couple of them have gone to zero for a year at a time. And it can be done. One shining example has been county where Rexburg is. just north of Idaho Falls, and they have gone to zero for a year at a time. So it's possible. So as we continue down the trail looking at some of the background of intersections and intersection safety, every state has a strategic highway safety plan. And this is mandated by the Federal Highway Administration in order to obtain some federal funds for highway safety. And years ago, when it came to funding highway safety projects, the funding was kind of interspersed and intermixed with any other types of roadway type projects. However, several years ago, Congress enacted a separate program specifically setting aside funding just for highway safety, because they recognize that the numbers of fatalities and serious injuries nationwide continued to stay at the same level or actually where it was increasing, and this was not acceptable. So these federal funds are available to the local level and are managed by LHTAC through the local highway safety improvement program. We're going to talk a little bit more about that program a little bit later on today. So there's money as it comes to us from the federal government down to the state level. It actually gets filtered and funneled into the local level, and agencies such as yourselves are able to use this funding for the intersection highway safety improvements. So towards the end of this workshop, we're going to go ahead and explore the application process for these safety funds. So just kind of hold that in the back of your mind as we run through everything today. So Federal Highway Administration recognized that while a number of states had intersection safety as an emphasis area in their required strategic highway safety plan, they lacked an action plan to guide intersection safety projects on local roads. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what you can do at the local level and as a local agency to really tune in on the planning process that will help you improve safety, and part of helping you improve that safety will be the opportunity to apply for those safety funds or those funds you currently don't have from your current sources of funding. So highway safety plans are really needed at the local level to guide the future of intersection safety. The plans include the activities, countermeasures, which are solutions, strategies, deployment levels, implementation steps, and estimates of funds necessary to achieve safety improvements at intersections. So more discussion is certain to happen on the creation of local highway safety plans, and I know that LHTAC is leading the way on that and is very interested in leading the way. So when we look at highway safety and highway safety planning, there's really three schools or three approaches to the implementation of highway safety at intersections. So local highway districts should consider methods of implementation when addressing intersection safety. And those three approaches are systematic, some people use the word systemic, spot location, and comprehensive. And so systematic can be thought of as looking at your system of roadways on a network basis to look at what are some of the common safety problems that we have and what can we do to solve those common safety problems. And I'll go over some examples in just a moment. Spot location is the tried and true. You know, that's where we have a lot of data and we go out there and everybody says, oh, the crash is happening at this spot. We must do something. So spot locations really are focused generally on one location or just a couple of locations close by, and they look at history and what has happened in the past. A comprehensive approach to highway safety looks at different partners or different modes of highway safety. You know, at intersections, we typically think along the lines of improving the engineering aspects of the intersection, but perhaps there's things that law enforcement can help us with. Perhaps there's things that an education problem can help us with. And certainly having better and good emergency medical response units can help us with safety at these intersections as well. So when we look at the systematic approach, in the systematic approach, there are some common crash types that are selected from data analysis. So as we now start peeling back the layers of the onion, we're very interested in being able to have a handle on the data and kind of start wrapping our hands around what is happening at this intersection. Intuitively, we know just from our experience about what's going on, But can we do some type of a dive or a deep dive into some of the data, historical data, and get an idea of really what's happening? Locations experiencing these crash types and locations with similar geometric features are those experiencing selected crash types can be then selected to treat systematically some problems that are happening at these like intersections with low cost treatments or countermeasures. So as an example of that, it might be that as we look at our system, our network of roadways within our system, and we're having a real problem with people running off the road on curves, and if we start to look at the data and we say, look at all these locations where we're having maybe single vehicle run off the road crashes, and I know we're talking about intersections, but I'm using the curve example today. Perhaps one solution might be that we implement a program or we put together a project where we'll put up some very simple signing, maybe some chevron signs that will help people, especially when they're driving at night, and hopefully alert them to slow down so they don't run off the road. So once a basic set of countermeasures, in this case the chevrons, are identified, the crash data system can be analyzed, and we can really start to choose those locations where we want to put these countermeasures for these solutions. So data comes at us through crash reporting. Another example of a systematic approach that would be applicable at intersections is maybe the installation of stop signs, go from a two-way stop to a four-way stop or an all-stop situation, or maybe even increase the size of the stop sign, or maybe try to increase the reflectivity of the stop sign. And a little bit later on, I'm going to show you an example of where the data can take us to maybe help us come to some of those conclusions. Again, it's really important to start thinking about reviewing the crash data and look for those cluster of locations. Look at those similar locations that exhibit the same safety challenges. And then you have an opportunity to come back and apply that systems or systematic approach. In many cases, these solutions can be low cost and pay some pretty big dividends. So you can apply these low cost countermeasures throughout your region. So some of the benefits of using a systematic approach, and not everybody is used to the systematic approach. It's something that has come kind of more into vogue here in the not too distant past or in the recent future. So some of the widespread benefits might be you get a widespread effect. The systematic approach can impact safety issues at a large number of locations. You kind of think about it, using it as a shotgun blast, okay? And you can include intersections or like intersections on your entire roadway network and kind of make the argument as to why we're going to improve these intersections in similar fashion at the same time. Another benefit is crash type prevention. Using predominant crash types, such as my example of run off the road at curves or larger stop signs at intersections, with a high or moderate level of crashes, the local highway district can address locations that have not yet experienced these crash types. And so that's kind of another benefit when we start thinking about the systematic approach to intersection safety versus, say, that spot location. We're now bringing ourselves away from being in a reactive mode or a reactive environment, and we're being proactive. When we're saying we have a safety problem at a certain number of similar type intersections, there may be those other intersections that are similar in nature, but they've yet to see a problem. It's probably maybe a matter of time before they start seeing these same problems. So we can actually go out there and make those safety improvements ahead of time and exhibit what is better known as a proactive approach. So we start to become proactive in nature. Another systematic benefit may be the cost effectiveness. If we implement these low-cost solutions across an entire system, we perhaps have the opportunity to have the economy of scale and apply this economy of scale. As an example, again, coming back to increasing the size of the stop signs, if we do it all in one shot, it's probably going to be less money when we start looking at buying mass quantities of material and being out there expending money on labor. Another benefit is reduced data needs. The systematic approach can be used without a detailed crash history for every single specific location. You can start to draw conclusions that if I have these similar looking locations, the crash data, if I've got similar volumes of traffic, the crash data could be construed to be about similar. So our data needs might not be quite as great. And so we can go about determining our countermeasures in our locations in maybe a little bit more cost-effective manner if we don't have to spend so much money on trying to acquire the data at each and every location. There is a drawback through the systematic approach. Sometimes, it just depends on who you're dealing with, justifications could be a bit difficult. It might be, well, again, coming back to this proactive approach, we're going to solve the challenges that we have at these certain intersection locations. However, we have certain other locations that are very similar from a traffic volume and a geometric standpoint. I would like to implement my improvements at those locations as well. You can have some pushbacks in. Why are we spending money here when we don't think we have a problem? And it can be thought of, and the argument can be built, start to be built along the lines, we'll just give it some time. The problem will eventually show up, and more likely than not. And so in the end, we may be heroes of the day because we're exhibiting that proactive approach. So since these are the types of projects that garner attention from decision makers, the media, elected officials, and so on, and the general public, it might require a little bit additional effort on you and your agency's part to come up with justification for spending money on some of those improvements to solve challenges or safety problems that maybe haven't quite cropped up yet. I believe that you can put together a pretty valid argument that just given an amount of time, those safety challenges will be there.
Brent?
Yes.
Even with the systematic approach, how do you prioritize where to make improvements when funding is limited?
Okay. Hang on to that thought because we'll get to that.
Okay.
So we'll go into a little bit of a prioritization conversation. That's a very good question. So just kind of hang on, and we'll go through that, and then we'll come back to that question. So while we're here for a second, is there anything else out there? Any other chat box comments?
Hey, can I skip the chat box?
Sure.
Takes me too long. Recently, the railroads replaced all yield signs replaced the stop signs with yields. Do you have any insight on the data that drove decisions?
How much time do you have today? I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. Yes, a long time ago, back when Phil Batt was governor, funding was made available to put stop signs at passive railroad crossings. That's crossings without lights and gates. Quite honestly, Idaho was only one of the few states that did that. And so it became law. And what the law said is that at a passive railroad crossing, you must install a stop sign unless an engineering study says you can remove the stop sign and put in the yield sign. Okay. Through the political process, that law was changed. And so the law reverted back to yield signs are the sign of the day. And if you want to put a stop sign up, it now requires an engineering study. So especially in corridors where you had truck traffic, heavy farm truck traffic down through maybe south central Idaho, trucks were not real keen about stopping and then restarting. Some were starting to make the safety argument about, well, if the truck stops, loses momentum, and restarts, maybe there's a greater chance of getting hit by a train. There was all kinds of theories out there floating around. So the political process and the law changing process took us back to where yield signs are the sign of the day. I know, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot out there, but I know, I think Lance Johnson said he signed in, and if we want to have a little sidebar chat, we can do that. They caught us a little bit by surprise. I think that we're going to be very, very interested in looking at that and continue to collect good data and see what the impact is. on allowing that change to happen? Are we going to see an increase of collisions and fatalities at rail crossings? It's pretty well known that when you get hit by a train, you generally lose. So I don't know. I hope that's answered your question. Okay, thumbs up on that. Okay, all right, very good, and a very good question. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of comment about that. So to kind of continue on, we've talked about the systematic approach or the systems approach, and where that has kind of come more into vogue. It really lends itself well if you're going to go about the task of employing low-cost safety improvement at intersections. Let's talk a little bit about that, the second approach, the intersection safety, that's been around for a long time. That's more along the lines of the spot location approach, or some people use the term black spot approach. The spot location approach, by and large, has typically been used or based exclusively on an analysis of crash history. It's like, oh my God, we have something really major bad happening at this intersection. We must do something. And it's due to the fact that some locations in an area or jurisdiction may have significantly higher number of crashes than most of the others. And it's important to identify locations and treat them accordingly. So throughout our conversation, I'm not saying that spot location approach is a bad approach. It's been around for a long time. It's still a good approach and a good approach that we can use in our toolbox. We just have to kind of think about, you know, what we're doing when we look at intersection safety from this angle. So the benefits of spot location approach may include that we're focusing on a real demonstrated need. Typically, the data has taken us there, the public has taken us there, the political environment has taken us there. And so the spot location can focus on that demonstrated need and focuses directly on locations where we have a history of crashes. However, there are some drawbacks to the spot location, and people are starting to recognize more and more what these drawbacks might be. So one of the drawbacks is the assumption, I don't mean to sound like a stockbroker, but the assumption that the past equals the future. And that is not really necessarily always the case. This approach assumes locations with a history of crashes will continue to have the same number and types of crashes in the future. So just a little teeny tiny story. When I did time over in District 6, I was assistant district engineer there for 5 years in Idaho Falls, the Siberia of Idaho. I had a legislator come in the door and demanding actually a signal be installed at an intersection. A relative had been involved in a very nasty crash. And so when all else fails, more and more people recognize that data will save the day. So of course, you know, having something horrible happen at an intersection is awful. Let's look at it and let's look at the data. When we looked at the data and did a deep dive, going back 20 years, this was really the only incident that had happened at that intersection. And when we looked at the crash report, there was some behavioral issues the driver was exhibiting that contributed to the cause of the crash. And so it was becoming more and more of a challenge to really come up with a justification to spend $300,000 or so to signalize this intersection. And so as we had the conversation, we talked about the systems approach to intersection safety and how we could take this money, look at the data where we had a greater need, and really kind of try to spread that money around to improve highway safety. In other words, really come across with the idea of we're getting that better return on investment. So past events do not predict future events. So as we went through this conversation, we were able to demonstrate that this might not be a real wise use of the poor old taxpayers' money. And we all, including the legislator, may have a hard time, if asked, why the money was being spent here, coming up with good reasons. So again, that was one of the drawbacks, but we had to go through that exercise. And again, data saved the day, because we were able to demonstrate that while it's very tragic, there probably is a minimal overall benefit to our entire system or roadway of networks. So the spot location can be implemented in parallel with systematic approach to provide that best combination of treatments within a highway district. So as we think about, we've only got a limited amount of resources, funds, equipment, money, and so on. We can think about, can we do something along the systems line, yet we recognize we might have a really bad spot over here that we need to pay attention to. And so kind of stick around for a little while. I'm going to go through that approach in a little bit more detail as we look at the data and how the data can save the day and help us put together our plan. And as the question that came up earlier was, how do we go about prioritizing? I think we'll be able to go about the task of better prioritization. So the third approach to intersection safety can be thought along the lines of the comprehensive approach. And this really starts with the integration of not only engineering, but other facets of safety that we see out on the highway. It's the integration of both that infrastructure or engineering and the behavioral solutions that are available to us for highway safety. This approach recognizes that not all intersections can be addressed solely by infrastructure improvements. So incorporating other elements is often required to achieve the overall improvement at the intersection. So some intersections, again, when we look at the crash reporting and the data, some intersections will be identified that have frequent driving violations for which targeted enforcement might be the appropriate countermeasure. The signage might look great, the geometrics look great, the illumination at night looks great, but we still have people that are just exhibiting bad behavior when it comes to going through the intersection. Oh, there's no volume. I'll just go ahead and run the sign. I won't pay attention to the signage. I'm busy doing other things, or inattentive driving, texting, and so on is very, very prevalent and becoming more so. So perhaps law enforcement can help us. In general, the most common violations of intersection, when we look at the crash reporting, is speeding, failure to yield, aggressive driving, failure to wear safety belts, and driving while impaired. These all contribute to some of the nasty things that happens when we crash at intersections. And so when intersections are identified as having reports and observations of these violations, perhaps there's an opportunity to coordinate with law enforcement agencies to help us improve the overall safety at that intersection. Also, education and outreach efforts can supplement enforcement to improve the effect of safety at those intersections. One thing that comes to mind is taking a look at driver's training, driver's education, and is there a need to help, or is there a need to heighten the awareness as to how we manage ourselves through intersections and how we drive through intersections? So there are programs out there through the Idaho Transportation Department Office of Highway Safety. There's potential grant programs that there's funding available to help law enforcement agencies help us enforce some of the laws at the intersections. And certainly emergency medical services plays a role there. We're very interested in hearing what they have to say, because they come in and have to deal with the aftermath of crashes that take place at intersections. So with that, let's bring up another polling question. This one I'm very interested in hearing what the answer is from each one of you today. As a person who works in roadway operations and maintenance, do you consider yourself a first responder? First responders can be thought of as police officers, emergency medical, so on. Let's open that up.
All right, so our next poll question is open. As a person who works in roadway operations and maintenance, do you consider yourself a first responder? All right, we'll give it just a few more minutes. It looks like we've got about 28 people that have responded so far. Brent, we did have a comment from Lance on the railroad crossings. He said the yield signs at railroad crossings comply with MUTCD. The stop signs did not.
Very good comment. Thank you, Lance, for bringing that up. That is true.
Okay, so we're going to close this out. Last call for responses. I'm going to end our poll and I'm going to share our results.
Wow, that's great. That's great. As many times I will ask this question in small group settings or other workshops, and I get responses that those who work in roadway operations or maintain the roadway do not consider themselves a first responder. So I'm really, really encouraged with this. I happen to think that those who maintain and operate the roadway are first responders, especially in the rural environment, because at times you may be the first one on the scenes of a crash, but then also you have an opportunity to maybe give some input as to what's happening at the crash and what is causing the crash, and give some input as to how we can improve safety. So that's great. I'm really happy to see that. Okay. So we're going to press on for another slide or two. We are going to take a break here very shortly. We got started a little past 9 o'clock, so I don't want to go any more than an hour without taking a little break. I know it's hard to sit there. So when we boil this all down, going through some of this introductory phase of our time together today, the purpose of the workshop is to provide information on effectively identifying intersection safety issues, look at what the countermeasures and solutions might be to address these intersection safety issues that we've identified. Okay, this is leading to the effective implementation of safety projects. And so this is going to include some pertinent information regarding the manual on uniform traffic control devices. We're not going to do a deep dive into the MUTCD today. That'll be for another time, but we may refer to it just a little bit. And so we'll look upon the MUTCD on the requirements of guidance on conducting field reviews, the identification of unsignalized intersections with multiple crashes and the potential for future crashes, the selection of appropriate low-cost improvement of these intersections, and the last one we want to talk about, the last couple that we want to focus in on today, our workshop purpose is to focus on evaluation reporting, because sometimes once we make improvements to these intersections, nobody bothers to go back and see if these improvements have actually really helped our lives. And then finally, we'll have a little bit of a conversation on how you can go about getting them some aid and seeking some funding through the local highway safety improvement program. So again, just to kind of set the tone a little bit for our workshop today, it is geared towards the non-engineer and towards existing intersections that are out there. We want to offer up a practical approach. I try to identify both those rural and urban safety issues at intersections, and talk about how you can actually go about doing field reviews and going through a data gathering process. The data is there, it's just a matter of getting to it. Let's go over some countermeasure selection. What are some good countermeasures or solutions that are available off the shelf that others have tried that are actually proven to be tried and true? Effective implementation. How best can we implement these safety improvements? The last one that's missing is evaluation, the importance of evaluation. And again, we may touch just a little bit upon the manual on traffic control devices. So right now, before we really kind of start into the meat or the heart of it, Dawn and Lori, I think it might be a good idea. Let's just can we take 5 minutes? All right, very good. Well, welcome back, everybody. So we had an opportunity to think about highway safety and particularly intersection safety from a national standpoint, how it's a concern, that there's funding available for the states to use, and this funding can filter down and does filter down to the local level. It can be used to improve intersection safety. We've taken a look at the data, and some of those data numbers are alarming. So as we now trudge down a little bit deeper, I used the term a little earlier about peeling back the layers of the onion. Let's start really looking close at intersection safety and how we can come up with some solutions. As we peel back the layers of the onion, we're very, very interested in being able to identify our problems. You know, the old adage is if you can't identify your problem, then how can you come up with a good solution? So we start with problem identification through good crash reporting. Idaho has a central repository for storing crash data that identifies locations with crash occurrences. This information is found in a typical crash database, and some of this information that's found is time and date of the crash, okay? The location, well, yeah, we're very interested in that. The crash type, the crash severity, and the weather conditions. And there's other things that we're interested in as well. And so this data can be used to help compare intersections within your local jurisdiction with others. And LHTAC does stand ready to provide some assistance to the local highway districts to help them get started with crash data analysis. So crash data is typically stored in a state by a state transportation department, department of a state police, and so on. And in Idaho, it's at the transportation department. And crash reporting comes about where if you're involved in a crash and somebody is there's a fatality, there's an injury or property damage that exceeds $1,500, law enforcement is obligated to put together a crash report that will land itself or be submitted to the crash repository or database. And so when we started our time together today, we had I think it was about 23,000 some odd crashes. These are reportable crashes for the year 2018 in Idaho. And so crash reporting comes from all 120 some odd law enforcement agencies throughout the state, and they come from state police, from sheriff's departments, and local police departments as well. So when a crash happens, it's a reportable crash. Do all crashes get reported? No, but hopefully the majority of them do, so they can go into the database. When a crash is reported at the conclusion of the investigation, I believe the laws of the state of Idaho say that crash must be submitted to the Idaho Transportation Department within 48 hours. And indeed, most, if not all, agencies report electronically. So the data is available and it's uploaded. But the key is at the conclusion of the investigation, somebody might sit around for quite a long time waiting for a crash report saying, how come it hasn't been submitted yet? Law enforcement perhaps hasn't concluded their investigation, especially if it's a nasty crash that maybe involves impaired driving. There's quite a little bit of investigation that goes into that. But there's another type of crash reporting that is out there that we can take advantage of. And I call it observational reporting, and this can be beneficial as well. This can be maybe crashes that go unreported that you know of, but also there might be an opportunity to capture a little bit of data or thoughts about what I'll term as near miss crashes. People just about crashed and you've been able to hear about that and what was the causation. And so these observations can come about not only by law enforcement, but they can also come about by what we observe on the roadway as operators and maintainers of the roadway. And so we rely upon those first responders. And that's why I was very interested in the question is, do you consider yourself a first responder? Because we rely upon some of this anecdotal information from first responders, such as people who maintain the roadway, law enforcement, and emergency medical services. Because, and if we were all sitting here together today, I would ask the reason why, and the response would come back as who knows the roadway better? Especially those who maintain the roadway. You know the roadway as well or better than anybody else in your agency because you see what's happening every day. You see some of the things that are happening as a first responder. Law enforcement has a lot to contribute in emergency medical services as well. So we do have those state databases that are available to us, but we also have an opportunity to think about what's happening out there from an anecdotal, or we have an opportunity to maybe keep our own log. So as we continue on problem identification, if a local highway district does not have access to state crash databases, law enforcement crash reports can be the valuable tool to identify the location and contributing circumstances. So it's a good idea if you're a roadway agency to try to strike up a good conversation or put together a good working relationship with local law enforcement if you're very interested in trying to improve safety, not only on all facets of your roadway, but also intersection safety, because they have a lot to offer. So when we look at crash reports, the minimal that really should be extracted is location. Of course, that's very obvious. The time and date, the crash type, rear end, side swipe, head on, the severity of the crash, weather conditions at the time, those sequence of events, if we can put our fingers on how the crash happened, and those contributing circumstances. Was it an engineering feature that we think was causing the crash, or was it a behavioral feature? So again, both LTAC and ITD can assist you in obtaining crash data for the use in your problem identification. So when we look at trying to put our arms around all of this and, try to figure out, well, what amount of data, what type of data is the best for us to use? At a minimum, it's recommended, I recommend that 3 years worth of data is needed to perform or start to perform a good analysis. You've got to have enough historical data to really start to tell the picture as to what is going on at that intersection or on your system of highways. So you can get a good picture of what's going on at an intersection. And if you're looking at the systemic or systematic approach to improve intersection safety, what's happening at all the other similar types of intersections. And data can come through those local databases if they exist. So if your local law enforcement is keeping some kind of a database on their own outside of the state's database, it'd really be nice to be able to get your hands on that, and it would help you identify those locations for safety improvement. 5 years is desired. That really gives a good, clear picture as to what is going on in your system. More than 5 years, you start running a little bit of a risk on relying upon your data. Some people are under the mindset that the more data, the better. My gosh, if you get 20 years of data, 25 years of data, that's great. We have to be just a little bit careful, especially when we're looking at a systematic approach and comparing all of our intersections, because things often do change. Improvements to the intersections change. So what is happening at the intersection today from a data standpoint might look different in the future from a data gathering standpoint, because those improvements might tend to skew the data. Traffic volumes increase, so that might skew the data a little bit. So if somebody says I can use 5 years worth of data, that's really a good number of years to use to consider. If somebody says, well, 20 years would be better, be a bit cautious on that when you're trying to compare apples to apples. Again, we're going to go over it in just a moment, but LTAC can help you with your data needs. ITD also, in their Office of Highway Safety, could help with their data needs. There's a couple of analysts over there that you can talk to. They have a system called WebCars. So my apologies to anybody from ITD if they're on today. That thing has not been very user-friendly in the past. What we're going to show you here in just a little bit, I consider to be more user-friendly as far as getting your data. So crash databases come in really, really handy on spot locations and the systematic approach, especially the systematic approach. So law enforcement crash reports, there's a couple of things that we want to focus in on: contributing circumstances, the contributions to the crash that the infrastructure makes. In other words, do we have some bad engineering design features that we want to try to overcome? Or are there some behavioral issues that we're having to deal with, and that we need others to help us change driver behavior through education or enforcement? So these things, as we look at them from the comprehensive approach or the big picture approach, it starts to point us to the right countermeasure direction. What are the solutions that we need to start coming up with that's going to effectively improve safety at that intersection? So we start thinking along the lines maybe of that comprehensive approach: the engineering, the enforcement, education, and certainly we're very interested in hearing what emergency medical services has to tell us, because they have to deal with the aftermath of these very nasty crashes. So the whole idea, our mindset behind problem identification, is let's tell the story. And we can start to tell the story in a very, very simple manner. We can actually take a map of our system and start using different push pins, different colored push pins. Say we had crashes here, and a different color for near misses here. Or we had severe injury crashes for one color and not so severe injury in another color, property damage. We can just use a simple map. We can actually develop a simple spreadsheet and really make this process very, very simple. We don't have to be in a very sophisticated environment to start identifying the problems from a safety standpoint that we have on our own system. And so again, I've said it now for about the third time, is don't be afraid to seek help, to help you get started, from LHTAC to the ITD Office of Highway Safety. If you need crash data, you can get your hands on the copy of the actual crash report, either through your local law enforcement agency or through an outfit in Idaho here called Access Idaho. So let's take a little bit of a dive. We're going to take a little bit of a breath here and see if we can get this to work. And I want to talk about being able to obtain crash report information off the web. And LHTAC has a great website that will give you all kinds of crash data. And you can sit at the table and spend a half a day and go over your network or your highway system and start thinking about, I've only got limited resources. And if somebody were to ask me where I'm going to put my resources, here are some of the areas that I would put my resources based upon the data. Here are some of the improvements that I would think about making based upon the data. So Brent's going to go into the Zoom environment here. We're going to change screens. Hopefully this is going to work. Here we go. And so if you go to this website, you can see the web address before you. It was on the screen just a little bit earlier. When you go there, this is what you're going to see. And does everybody see a map of the state of Idaho with like lots and lots and lots of dots on it? If you don't see it, I need somebody to say I don't see it.
We can see it.
Okay, all righty. So when you go to LHTAC's website, there's a tab over on LHTAC's website that says resources. And if we scroll down through that, it's called an interactive crash data map. And the link that I gave to you on the previous slide takes you right to this location. Okay. Brent,
would you mind if I showed them the route to get there, and then we'll bounce back to that?
Absolutely, because I think this is very important. And anybody, if I can use this, anybody can use this.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen really quick. Okay, do you guys see the LHTAC website up? Not yet. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, so like Brent had mentioned, we're going to go to lhtac.org, and across this top banner here, you're going to see a tab for resources. So we're going to click on that resource tab. And then down the right-hand side, we're going to see a tab for maps. And under the maps is going to have all of our resources like this, but we're looking for the interactive crash map. And that's how you'll find this resource that Brent is using now. So I'll let you share again.
And by the way, we just got a comment that popped up from Lance Johnson giving Kelly Campbell's email address over at ITD. Kelly Campbell works in the Office of Highway Safety and is a crash data analyst there full-time. She is a terrific resource for being able to help you with crash data and your crash data needs. If you need somebody to talk to, Kelly can help you. And then also LHTAC can help you as well. So we brought the screen up, and oh my God, Brent, look at that. It's the great state of Idaho with all these horrific dots. It looks like some weird animal that had some kind of a disease outbreak. But never fear, we're going to kind of home in on this. So if you can see my pointer, I'm going to go over on the left-hand side where it looks like a little bit of a pin and hit that. And the first screen we bring up is this layers screen. And we start at the top and we can see it says bridges. Well, we're not interested in bridges today, although bridges are out there. We're interested in safety. So the box is automatically checked because the link took us there automatically. And we're also very interested in having the counties and selected items checked, and those will be checked automatically for you as well. So we want to start now filtering the data. So if we look at my arrow at the top, we go to the first filters button, and we have some selections that we can make. We can select and customize our area filter. So I'm not picking on anybody here, but there's a couple of examples that I want to show you, various jurisdictions that we'll go to, and then we can kind of see if we get any comment. So I'm very interested in going to a rural road jurisdiction. And I'm going, who would be good? And you can see as I go down and scroll through everybody, you're all there. All the highway districts are there. And I'm interested in seeing if I can bring this up. I'm interested in the Canyon Highway District today. They're a good group of people. We got anybody here from Canyon? I'm sure we do, usually are. And so let's bring up just the Canyon gang. And so I can start to type in Canyon Highway District, hit the enter button, and lo and behold, there's the Canyon Highway District. I can drop and drag a rectangle around all these dots to get to my data, but I'm not quite ready to do that yet. So I'm going to go up here, this square that gives me the claw. I can work my map around. I can zoom in on it, do all kinds of things. I'm interested in, and you're sitting there scratching your head, well, gee whiz, Brent, what are you interested in? I'm interested in looking at the intersection of South Indiana Avenue and Homedale Road. Now, I'm not very sophisticated when it comes to this stuff, but if you're very familiar with your system of roadways, and I'm assuming that most of you are, you can kind of start scrolling down here. Oops, bear with me. And you can see, well, there's Homedale. So Homedale Road's got to be around there somewhere, right? So lo and behold, there's Homedale Road. Oops, let's keep going. If I can move this around, and I'm going to have to move this other little screen here. I've got a bunch of pictures there. Okay. See if I can't get this to move. Well, again, I'm not the best user, but if I can use this, anybody can. And I'm looking for Indiana. Is it in here somewhere? Okay. There's Farmway Road. I think I'm getting close. There's South 10th. Am I getting close? South Mountain Avenue. Ah, South Indiana. So does everybody see that? And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. So I'm at the intersection of South Indiana Avenue and Homedale Road. Very interested. And I can tell just immediately right now that there's a lot of dots at that intersection. There's a lot going on. So I'm going to get rid of my claw. I'm going to go to the rectangle. And so I'm going to hold down my left button and I'm going to draw a rectangle around that intersection. Let go of my left button. And if you look at the bottom of my screen, there's my crash data for that intersection. You can see that those circles have gone to a dark blue. Okay. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. All right. And I'm going to start looking at the crash data that you see at the bottom of the screen. And this comes off the crash reports. Now, I will tell you that crash reports are filled out by law enforcement. Does law enforcement do a real super consistent 100% spot on job when it comes to consistency of filling out crash reports? This 5-page crash report, not necessarily so, but it's pretty close, reasonably close, and I'll point some of that out. So one of the things that we want to identify, there's a serial number identifier on the left-hand side. I will tell you that in this reporting environment, you are not going to see personal names, personal addresses, or personal telephone numbers. those are all stripped out when it comes into this database that we're using today. Personal information is taboo, and one of the reasons for that, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons for that was like what I call the ambulance chasers coming out, looking for people in the form of maybe attorneys. I hope we don't have any attorneys there today, or chiropractors. Okay, so the highway system is local. Let's just kind of go across the screen. The severity, and remember, one of the things that we were very interested in knowing was the severity of the crash. And if we look at Indiana Avenue and Homedale Road, we can say we've got property damage. B injury is the middle of the road injury. There's an A injury. We started our conversation today by saying that's a very severe injury. You may not be the same person after the crash. C injury is more of a minor injury. There's more property damage. And so as I scroll down through this, I can kind of get a real feel for what the severity of the crashes are. There's a lot of property damage, and it looks like there's quite a few C injuries and B injuries. I see just on a first glance that maybe there's this one A injury. So when crashes do take place, I don't see a lot of fatalities, and I don't see a lot of serious injuries. But I do see a lot of crashes, and I do see a lot of injury and property damage. The units that were involved is a single unit, so that tells me that it was more or less along the lines of a run off the road. But most of them probably are a 2-unit, and indeed there's one of the even 3 units. So 3 units got tangled up in that crash. Most of them should say Stu. Once in a while you'll see one that perhaps they had a bit of a single vehicle run off the road. The accident year. So again, when we set up our filters, and I'll show you this on the next one, we set it up with 5 years of data. And remember I said 5 years is the optimal number. You could go with this program, you can go with fewer years, but it will always default to the last 5 years. And so our latest year is 2018. That's the latest year of the 2019 data. Hasn't made it into the database yet. It takes a while. So 2018, looking backwards to about 2014. And so you can see there's some 17 crashes, 16 crashes, 15 crashes, and so on. The date of the crash, that was another great big one we were very interested in. Is it wintertime, summertime, fall harvest season, so on. We're very interested in the crash time as well. Was it nighttime or daytime? And crashes are always reported in 24-hour time using the 24-hour clock. And the day of the week is very interesting to us. Well, we're on a weekend where we might have had higher traffic. Are we in a recreational area? So that might be of interest to us as well. Was it intersection related? Hopefully the police officer, when he filled this out, puts in true because he's at an intersection, and indeed he has. Street number 1, and here's where kind of a bit of the disparity comes in the way it's reported. Officer might report the street 1 is Homedale Road. The next officer might come along in the next crash and say, no, Indiana is street 1 and Homedale Road is street 2. Don't get too hung up on street names, street 1 and street 2, as long as we're at the intersection and you can identify clearly that your data is coming from that intersection. Crash might take place just a little bit outside of the intersection boundaries. There's an opportunity for the officer to report that as well. The intersection type, we're very interested in knowing it is a 4-way intersection, so we don't have a 3-way or a 5-way or 6-way. And then as we started our conversation today, we said 4-way or a 4-legged intersection is our most popular type of intersection. The roadway type is, again, this is all described by law enforcement. It's a 2-way with no divider. It's pretty consistent. There are some that say we have a raised, depressed divider. It could or could not be the case. And so when you do your field investigation, I'll talk about that a little bit later, you can kind of determine what is the truth. Do we have the depressed divider or is it no divider? But I'm going to go with no divider now. Speed limit, again, tends to be fairly consistent. But these are things when you do the field visit that you have to kind of verify what the speed limit is. The officer has an opportunity to put in what the direction of travel is. And the action of the driver is turning right, going straight. So as we look at this, we think about what's happening at the intersection. I've got things all over the map. I got quite a bit of going straight. I'm going straight. So How do we crash going straight? Need to put our thinking cap on. Were we impaired? Looks like everybody was driving well that day. I don't see. True would mean that you are impaired. This one said there was a lane depart, and if we were to scroll back over, I think it was a single vehicle crash. So apparently when they crashed at or near the intersection, it was a lane departure crash, but most of them were probably ring faults. Here's the column that we're very interested in. The officer will give us some information on the harmful event. If I can expand that, yep, there it is. Other fixed object. I don't know, I'd have to do a little bit of more investigation on that. Angle, side swipe, opposite, angle turning. Somebody hit a fence, angle, head on turning, angle. So it means people are turning into each other. So you can say, I've got to look at this from the standpoint of everybody's crashing from this angle business. The most harmful event is, again, angle turning, fence, head-on turning. So the officer has an opportunity to put in what he considers to be the most harmful events. All events, there's an opportunity to kind of summarize that. If I can expand that, there we go. And so officer can say first harmful event, what they consider to be the most harmful event if there's a multiple number of events, and has an opportunity to list what they consider all events. Not every officer is going to put in all the events, and that does kind of make some sense. You can go on further. The next one is the contributing circumstance. And as a manager of the intersections in my highway district, or a person who is assigned the task to look at improving safety, I'm very interested in the contributing circumstance. Failed to yield. Speed too fast for conditions. And that was our single vehicle person. Failed to yield, overcorrected. Here's one, emotional, depressed. I don't know, that's a bit subjective. So again, we rely upon law enforcement to be filling this out. Angry, disturbed. Maybe he or she got put into handcuffs and carted off, I don't know. But you can see the majority is failed to yield, drove left of center. Most of it is failed to yield. There's an opportunity for an officer to put in a second contributing circumstance and a third contributing circumstances. Most of the time, you'll see officers will leave the second contributing circumstance and third contributing circumstances blank. They are satisfied just to put in the first contributing circumstance. Not always, most times. So to see the word none on the second and third contributing circumstances is not an unusual event. Again, road surface, we started our conversation today talking about paved, gravel, or dirt. Most of the roadways we deal with today are paved, and indeed, if we had a four-legged intersection and two legs were gravel and two legs were paved, maybe we would be able to kind of try to determine was there some causation of crash contributed by the roadway surface. Road surface condition, we're very, very interested in this. Snow, again, this first one was kind of a single vehicle, appeared to be run off the road, so makes sense there might be some snow on the ground and slippery. Wet, dry, wet. And so we're looking at, if we have a lot of road surface conditions that are wet, maybe, and failure to yield and people going through stop signs, maybe we've got some kind of either a speed issue, or maybe we've got some kind of a road surface friction issue. We need to improve the roadway surface itself. Other road conditions, typically, in law enforcement will write in none. Weather condition, we're very interested in knowing what the weather condition is. Clear, cloudy. Most of our weather conditions at this intersection was clear. What was the light condition? Day, night, dawn, dusk. Okay. No street lights off. This one says no street lights. So when I did my field investigation, I would want to look at what the illumination is. Seems to be a little bit of most of them say no street lights, but this one says street lights on. That might be the case. Remember, we started with 2018 at the bottom and 2014 at the top. Maybe at some point in time, maybe in 2017, somebody went out and put in street lights. So kind of getting to the end here, the traffic control device is the stop sign. And I want to try to expand that. There we are. At cross street only. Okay, so we're not at a four-stop location. And it says it was functioning, and the last column basically said most everybody, the geometrics horizontally is going straight. So we aren't on any curves or any kind of crazy horizontal geometrics, and the geometrics vertically were on a level surface. And finally, we're able to look at what the age of the driver is, and so that might lend itself to some behavioral issues if we're seeing a lot of people that are very, very young or more mature, like we're all, like me, getting to be. Maybe there's something that kind of contributes to the crash that way. Okay. So that kind of tells the picture very, very easily at the intersection of Homedale Road and Indiana Avenue. So I want to kind of pause for just 1 second. You can see all the data we've looked at. You can see that you can start drawing your own conclusions as to what might be wrong with the intersection. And rather than run around going from intersection to intersection to intersection, trying to prioritize, we have a lot of crashes happening here. Maybe this is the first one to start looking at, and it's first one to start prioritizing when we start putting together our jurisdictional or highway district-wide intersection safety improvement program, because we were going to back the money ship up to LHTAC and they're going to just give you boatloads of money, right? No, I'm just kidding. So the LHTAC guys that are on, you can wake back up. I know you might have passed out, but you can see just by looking at the data that it starts to really tell the story and tell the picture just by sitting in the computer. So I want to pause here for just a second, Dawn, and see if there's anybody in the chat box or if there's anybody actually who wants to kind of pop on live with any comments or questions.
Yeah, I agree. I think this would be a great time to open it up if you want to unmute your microphone with any comments or questions. There is a comment from Lenny that a roundabout was constructed in 2019 at that intersection.
Well, there you go.
What's the enforcement of vegetation that's not in the right of way if you want to remove it?
You're asking Brent?
Yeah, the speaker's on, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Or, to remove vegetation that's not in the right of way.
Okay, well, I'll give you my take, but maybe there's others that'll weigh in on that. If it's within your right of way, can you remove vegetation? Sure, yeah.
No, that's not in the right of way.
Right, but if it is, you can. If it's not within the right of way, my guess is you're probably going to have the permission of a property owner or negotiate with a property owner. Say, we need to come on for safety reasons. And you're going to see when I get to it, you're going to see when I get to the geometric part of the presentation about sight distance. I'm going to share some sight distance triangles with you. That if you're armed with this information, you might have to elicit the help of the property owner and say, I know you're on private property, but your vegetation is contributing to crashes, and here's the data that I've got on the crashes, and some of them are severe. Can we negotiate a deal to remove some of the vegetation? So thoughts on that? Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in on vegetation on private property? Because it can become, no pun intended, a bit of a thorny issue. But that has been my experience. Any other thoughts?
Any questions or comments at this time?
Brent, this is John Perry. How do you look at the data and kind of decide on what you want to do to make improvements? For instance, this intersection here, what would you key in on to help you decide?
Well, I would start, now the roundabout has come about as a solution, so I appreciate that comment. It sounds like it just has happened very recently. But some of the things that I might key on is if I've got a four-legged intersection with two stop signs and I've got a lot of failure to yield, and I think, did we see failure to yield? Okay, It's just trying to look and see. But if we have a failure to yield, perhaps we've got people that maybe the introduction of additional stop signs, turning it into an all-way stop, might help us. It might be that if we interview law enforcement and we do a field visit, that the stop signs are very small, yet the traffic volume has increased over the years. You know, subdivisions are being built out around. Maybe we want to increase the size of the sign. So we kind of see some of those subtle things. What about pavement markings? If we're getting a lot of people that are turning, is there something that if we ratchet up the budget, do we want to introduce some kind of maybe turn lane? If we got a lot of rear end crashes, you know, is there something that we can do to improve the turning movements? So when we look at this, we just kind of start listing out all these common things on a sheet of paper and see what floats to the surface. And then we put our creative thinking cap on and say, you know, what can we do to improve this intersection? But it starts with really being able to look at the data and just really kind of making a list. Just start big and start working your way down. Does that make sense?
So Brent, we had another comment on that intersection, said that added a splinter island on Homedale legs to bring attention to stop signs and the intersection.
Yeah, that's another great comment. Yep. So you can see that this intersection has been looked at very recently, and I can't help but think that you know, the data help take us there, but then also the observational. It's like we've got a real problem out here, and the observation, the chance to collect observational data and talk about it has also brought us to the conclusions of making those intersection improvements. Roundabouts don't come cheap, but they can be the right tool in your toolbox to solve the intersection safety problems. Not one size fits all, but maybe that was a good solution. It sounds like it. Any other thought before I lurch the train? I'm going to do one more example, and it's probably going to take us to quitting time. Okay, because I've looked at an area that's you might kind of classify as a semi-rural area, or the city's growing up around it, and anybody is there from Canyon Highway District, they might agree with that assessment. But let's look at another area. So how do we get out of this? Well, that's a good question. So I can come into the rural road jurisdiction. You can see my arrow. And I'm going to go down to the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side and hit the reset. So when all else fails, hit reset. And we're going to come back to our polka dot map. Okay. So let's see, where else in the state would I want to go? And not everybody is in the room today to yell, pick me, pick me. So I'll do the picking. When I think of Lemhi County, I think of Jay Davis County. And I know he's out there today, and I don't mind picking on Jay every once in a while. So Jay, I'm not picking on you too bad, but maybe just a little bit. So let's start by going over to the, so I can start by going to the rural road jurisdiction. You can see that on the left-hand side. And I can either scroll down through the boxes to bring up Lemhi County, or I can just start typing Lemhi County, and there it is. Lemhi County. I'm going to pick Lemhi County. And there it is. It brings up Lemhi County. Now, the next thing that I want to show you that I failed to do in the first example is if you follow my cursor, the finger, over to the filter, that's the big filters. That's the selected, customized, an area filter. We're going to an area. I want to drill down a little bit further on my filter selection. Let's take a real quick look. I can pick local and state highways. I'm interested in both because the intersections with the local system does happen with state highways. But I can look at the crash severity. And for now, I'm going to leave them all on. But if I were very interested in just fatal or serious injury or the 8 crashes, then I could blank out everything else. So all I'd have to do is just click those check marks, and it would take it out of the equation. But I'm going to keep them all on. Crash, there's our 5 years of data that will automatically populate. But if I wanted 3 years, the most recent 3 years, I could get rid of 2015, 2014. The number of units per vehicle, has to do with the unit size, tires, and so on. Those are all clicked automatically. I would just leave them all clicked. You're interested in all the number of units and vehicle types. And those numbers refer back to the crash report. So just leave that one alone. Intersection related, I would say yes. And in fact, I want to just go to the intersections because that's what we're talking about today. So I'm going to take no out and I'm just going to say yes. Lane departure, we've seen that we do have lane departure that does happen at sometimes at intersections. So I'm going to leave that in. I'm going to leave them all in. The intersection type, 5 or more points, T intersection, traffic circle, roundabout, I'm going to leave them all in. I like them all. And here's the first harmful event. And I would leave those all checked. But you can get rid of some of those harmful events so it doesn't show up on your database. And so I've made the one change in the fact that I just want intersections only. And so I'm going to hit the filter button. It's going to repopulate. And you can see I lost some of my circles there. I've gone just to intersections. Did everybody see that? I'm going to show that just one more time real quick. I'm going to add the intersection related. I'm going to put the no back in. Take a look at the circles. When I say reset the filter. So all the circles that joined us just now are crashes that are non-intersection related. So you can really kind of filter this thing down, which makes it very nice. So I just want intersection related. Well, I've been to Salmon a time or two, and there's always an intersection that has intrigued me a bit. And so again, I've gone back up to the box. I'm not quite ready to draw my rectangle. So I go back up to the square. You get the big claw here. I'm going to try to center everything. And then I'm going to zoom down. And this intersection that intrigues me is south of Salmon on US 93. So again, we kept the box checked on a state highway or non-local roadway and local roadway because I'm interested. Okay, there's the Lemhi County Airport. That's where Jay brings in his private jet all the time. They've got just barely enough landing length for it. Okay, I'm going to come down just a little bit more. And it looks like Jay has a bit of a problem with the intersection of US 93 and Lover's Lane. Okay, I didn't even know there was such a thing. What's going on here? Let's draw a box around it. And boom, there it is. There's our crash data for the intersection of US 93 and Lover's Lane. It's also called, in all fairness, Demick Lane, I think, to the east. So, but there it is. So there's our crash data. I want to try to bring this up all the way. So we don't have quite as many data points as we did over in the Canyon Highway District, but that's okay. I can clean up the screen just a little bit by hitting the X over here. If you can see my cursor, I can kind of minimize that and get rid of it. And I've still got the intersection screen, but you kind of see a little bit more of the lay of the land. And so again, let's just take a quick look. I'll go a little bit quicker this time. The serial number doesn't mean a whole lot to me. The highway system, the officer can put in state or local. We're on this, our intersection is both systems. By the way, if we were looking at this data with off intersection data, it would tell us local or state. But here we've got a combination, and the officer has a bit of a problem sometimes filling that out because you have an intersection of both a state and local system. Let's look at the crashes. We got a B crash, that's fairly serious. Minor injury crashes and property damage. So no fatalities, which is good. One injury is one injury too many, and no serious injuries. 2 units, there's one involved 3, so we had 3 cars. There's the crash year, the crash date, the time we're very interested in. Were we there day at night? It's always reported in military time. The day of the week. And you know, you can come back and you can say, is everything happening like on a Friday or a Saturday? You know, is there some event in the area that takes me to increased volumes? And do I have to kind of work on maybe some behavioral issues there? Intersection related is all true, very good. The street 1 is US 93, very consistent. I would venture a guess and say maybe the same officer has visited this a number of times. You can see there's 2 streets to the east, it's Demick. To the west, it's Lover's Lane, so take your pick. Since we're in an intersection, there's no distance. That's what kind of a intersection is it? It's a four-way intersection. Somebody put in T intersection, but that doesn't quite look like it's right. So you'd want to question that, especially when you did your field visit. The road type is a two-way with no divider, but there's two-way double yellow painted divider in a couple of entries. So I would want to kind of verify all that as well. So again, it comes back to what I said earlier, consistency in crash reporting is pretty good, but sometimes isn't always consistent. Speed limit 65 on US 93. Looks like it's about 35. Somebody reported as 25 on the crossroad. Driver action, there's a lot of going straight there. Looked like the crash that happened during the passing. I would say maybe that was the 3-car guy. Okay. Yep, probably was. Okay, so somebody was passing, but by and large, it was like going straight. I see a lot of going straight, stopped in traffic, turning left, visual obstruction. None. We've got a clean intersection, it looks like. Impaired, well, we've got one poor soul that decided to drink and drive or drug and drive. And he also had lane departure where nobody else had lane departure. Here's where we're very interested. First harmful event, okay. It's angle, rear end, side swipe. Okay, that was, I think, our passing one, yes. Head on turning, rear end turning, rear end turning, rear end. So there's quite a few rear ends. So I don't know, maybe there's something there that we want to look at as far as trying to solve that. Maybe there's some geometrics we want to look at. I don't know. Again, the most harmful event is very similar, rear end, side swipe. The officer has an opportunity to put in all events. Continued on with head-on turning, rear end turning, embankment angle, rear end, and so on. So the contributing circumstance, let's see if anything leaps out at us. Failure to yield, following too close, failure to yield, none. The officer didn't feel like riding that day. There's always a contributing circumstance. Inattention, and I always love it when they put in other, because who on God's green earth knows what other means. Okay. So therefore, that's sometimes you maybe have to, if you're very interested in it, you might have to find the crash report or find the officer and say, tell me more about it, if you need to do so. Road surface, as we can see, it's paved, okay? It's dry, okay. Other road conditions is none. The weather was clear, the light condition, everything happened during the daylight hours. I'm just reporting traffic control device. There's a sign, I need to move that. Okay, there's a sign. Get this to expand. Yeah, stop sign on cross street only, stop sign on cross street only, none. Okay, and if we got a lot of rear end, maybe we're not seeing a lot of T-bone or side swipe, maybe we're okay as far as signage goes. We'll want to think about that. Traffic control is functioning, yes. The horizontal geometrics are nice, everything's nice and straight. And the vertical geometrics tells us everything's sitting on a level plane, so we don't have any sags or hills or vertical sight distance issues. There's the age of the drivers. The poor guy that was out drinking and driving, he was 27 years old, so maybe as he approaches 47 or 50, he'll learn his ways. So there, when you go to a different environment and you start looking at just the data, it maybe takes us to a different set of causation factors that tells us we need to come up with some solutions that look a little bit differently than maybe some other intersections in other parts of the state or intersections within our system. So I hope, Jay, that you didn't mind me picking on you.
Oh, no problem. I'm used to it.
Okay. I'll pause here, and I don't know if you want to weigh in on it, what we just saw, just like we got some feedback that there was a roundabout put in, or is there any? I'm going to open it up like we did last time. Is there anybody else that can comment?
No, there's no roundabout, and it's just one of them corners. I think a lot of it boils down to not paying attention. And as Rick threw in there, sometimes turn signals and brake lights and brakes use in Lemhi County is optional.
Okay. And so you can expect, you can go from say, that urban environment to that semi-urban, semi-rural environment to more of a rural environment. And again, you can start looking at all of your intersections, look for those intersections that there's a lot of action taking place. What is causation? Then you can start thinking along the lines of my prioritization. Do I have similar intersections that are displaying a lot of the similar crash types? And does this lend itself well to a good systematic project or program? And then we're going to cover this later. I can go about the task of trying to apply for some of these funds, maybe through that systems or systematic approach, and tell the story and prove to the universe that we do have a challenge here that we need some help with. So, and we'll get more into that. So with that, yeah, I'm sitting here at the clock down here on good old mountain time. The big hand's on 12, the little hand's on 11. We've gotten to the end of our 2 hours.